Hey guys, Strange here. With the PBN Season 8 post-draft power rankings. Shaq asked me to do this because I'm not in the league. Frankly, just too busy. But I had off work today, so I figured I could do these PRs. Um, so the way I did these PRs is I ranked them based off of 5 categories. And then each category got points out of 10. So total you can get up to 50 points. The categories were defensive core, offensive core, hazards, synergy, and versatility. Um, so yeah, if you have any complaints about where you are, what my thoughts are, please direct them to Shaq because one, I don't care, and two, it's his fault. Everything's his fault. Okay, so I'll go bottom up. So in last place, place 16, we have surprise, surprise, Shaq. So for the defensive core, I gave him a score of 2 because he does not have a defensive core. His team is all offense. Like, I don't think there is a single mod on his team that doesn't have an offensive stat lower than 110. I don't remember what Pelipper's special attack stat is, but that might Pelipper is his defensive mod. He does not have any ghost resists, and the only thing good defensively about his team is he has grass resist for Megapert. That is the only positive I took note. And by the way, I spent like the last 2 hours going through the list, or going through all the teams and kind of putting notes on, so I might forget some things as I do this, but whatever. For his offensive core, I gave him a score of 9. Pretty much every mod on his team has some type of coverage to break a ground type for the Regieleki. And then, just as I kind of mentioned earlier, everything is like really high offensive stats. It'd be very hard to defend against this team. But for hazards, I gave him a score of 3 because nothing on his team wants to run hazards, like ever. What you got? Stealth Rock Megapert, Stealth Rock Marowak, and then Scolipede with Spikes and T-Spikes. Scolipede's like the only thing that would want to run like spikes, but like with a team like this, you kind of want to run like Protect, Sword Stance, to help clean up at the end. And then he only has 2 removers, which are Pelipper and Regieleki, neither of which ever want to run hazard removal. So yeah, your hazard game sucks, Shaq. Synergy wise, I gave him a 6. There's offensive synergy in terms of his Pokemon break for each other. Like, Megapert breaks for Regieleki. Hoopa helps break for, like, Melmetal and Kyurem. Zapdos definitely breaks for Melmetal and Kyurem, and so on. Team also has some really strong pivot options with, like, U-Turn Zapdos, Voltorich Reggie, I don't know if Baton Pass is legal, but Baton Pass Scolipede, Teleport Gardevoir, U-Turn Pelipper, and Flip Turn Megapert. So he can pivot around a lot, which is like very good for an offensive team. And then his team also has like a mini Trick Room mode with like Melmetal, Hoopa, and Gardevoir, and Marowak Alolan. So that's just another thing you kind of have to prep for when playing this team. But the lack of any type of defensive synergy is holding back that category still. And then for versatility, I gave him a 6. Some of his mods are just like one-trick ponies, like Zapdos, the Regieleki, and the Virizion and Pelipper. They're all going to do the exact same thing every single week. Not much variety there, and just his team in general, like it's going to be HO every single week. It's going to be very predictable what he's going to bring. what sets he's going to bring and so on. So then in 15th place, we have Stevo. For defensive core, I gave him a 3. This team doesn't have like any standout defensive Pokemon. Like, yeah, Shuckle has really good defensive stats, but like no HP and is usually Hazard Lead Suicide with like Sticky Web, Stealth Rock, Encore, Final Gambit. And then Tentacruel is also defensive, but like it's easy to chip down. Only 2 forms of reliable recovery on this team as well, in Recover Celebi and Roost Dragonite, which does not help with that defensive core at all. Team just dies to Freeze Dry. Like, you have thick fat Snorlax, and that's the only thing that can switch into a Freeze Dry. And then Volcanion helps, like, versus like Ice Beam, but still, Ice Spam is very scary against this team. No Fairy type, so Dragon types just spam Draco and Outrage, and everything dies. And 2 Rock Resist, and Hitmonchan and Excadrill, which is not good because neither one is switching on a Rock type, and Rock types often have Earthquake, so you're going to struggle a lot with Dragon, Rock, and Ice types. For offensive core, I gave him a 6. The team lacks a good Choice Scarf user. Like, Honchkrow and Excadrill are like the only options that would run Choice Scarf, and neither like running Choice Scarf just because like Honchkrow only has base 71 speed. It's not that fast. And then if you're running at Scarf Excadrill, you're not going to utilize Rapid Spin very well. You're not going to Swords Dance and whatnot, and you like being able to click your dual stab. And there's a big gap in speed tiers, so like it goes from Dragonite at 80 up to Tentacruel at 100, and then then it jumps up to Sneasel at 115, and then Mega Manectric up to 135. So like a Torn T or anything around like the 120 range is going to be very scary to deal with. Same with like a base 95, because they can just kind of slap on a Choice Band and plow through this team. And then because of that, the team is also very reliant on webs with Shuckle, so you're kind of setting yourself up for failure there almost, because if they set up a substitute or any setup move on the Shuckle as you click webs turn 1, you can be in a really bad position and might not recover from that. For hazards, I gave him a 9. He has lots of hazard setters with like Stealth Rock, Drill, Celebi, and Shuckle, T-Spike's Tentacruel, webs on Shuckle as well. And then he has 6 different hazard removers in Defog Dragonite, Volcanion, and Honchkrow, and then Spin Excadrill, Hitmonchan, and Tentacruel. So he'll never have to worry about playing against hazards, really. For synergy, I gave him a 4. There's not much synergy going on here. Only 2 Volt Turn options, and then this paired with the lack of a defensive backbone will make everything just difficult. Team kind of feels like it's a bunch of favorite mods slapped together. Yeah, nothing really breaks for each other that well either. So, and then for versatility, I gave him a 5. Some of the Pokemon have really good coverage options, but like Sneasel, Main, and Mega Main, and Drill and Honchkrow pretty much run the exact same 4 moves every single game. And not much variety there, and then they're probably going to run the same item every single week. And like Dragonite pretty much always runs heavy duty boots now, even if you have really good hazard removal. Okay, for slot number 14, we have Afonso. So, Uh, for defensive core, I gave Afonso a 4. You can see the trend with these bottom few teams. His team doesn't have defense at all. He's very, very weak to ice and ghost types. Like, yeah, you have Genesect and Rotom for the ice types, but neither of them have reliable recovery. Like, you have to wish past Sylveon into them. But you also have triple ground types. So, yeah, ice types are very scary. And then, other than Diggersby and then, like, a Savali normal, or, yeah, the Savali in general, those are only 2 ghost resists. And then with Diggersby being a 3rd ground type, it's not looking too good for you there. Like, if you play Frostlass, it's GG. You also have very few resistances to flying and dragon types. Like, you got Rotom again for the flying types, and then of course Savali applies to all these. And then for dragon types, you have the Sylveon and Genesect, but a lot of dragon types also get Flamethrower for the Genesect, and Iron Head is on pretty much every Pokemon. So Sylveon, I have to worry about that as well. And just in general, way too much pressure on the Rotom and Sylveon to be your defensive backbone. For offensive core, I gave him a 7. He does have a lot of setup options, but a thing to consider is that Genesect cannot be shift gear, and it cannot have an item. And then pretty much all of his other offensive options, like, they run their stab moves, and that's it. But what really helps this out is that Mega Garchomp is broken. SD Scale Shot, GG. But then Afonso is also missing a lot of strong stab options like Ice, Rock, Fighting, Flying, Dark, and Ghost. Like, personally, I feel like every draft should have an Ice and a Rock type, and Fighting, and Flying. And usually either Dark or Ghost. So missing all those really hurts him a lot. He does have like coverage options for those, especially with Genesect and its crazy coverage, but Genesect can only have 4 moves, like, really hurting yourself there. And you got, again, the 3 ground types. You're spamming Earthquake to break everything. Like, it's not going to work out that well. For hazards, I gave him a 7. He has every type of hazard, but really only Orbeetle wants to run hazards. Like, yeah, you can do Sashly, Dugtrio to set up rocks. Mega Garchomp, you're probably never going to run rocks on it. Dragology is usually spec, so it doesn't like running T-Spikes. Who runs Spikes? Diggersby. And yeah, only Orbeetle likes to run webs. And then you have good removal, but you don't have a spinner. And having webs without a spinner is generally never that great. But on the plus side, you're going to be forcing your opponent to defog as well. So that can help your SERP because you can switch it out in on the defogs and get that evasion boost. So that helps with your hazard score. And then for synergy, gave Afonso a 5. This is another team where it just seems like he slapped on a bunch of good mods together and hoped it worked. And it just needs webs to pretty much do anything. Just because it's kind of slow. And will struggle a lot with like a Choice Scarf, Brave Bird spammer, or Freeze Dry spammer. And then for versatility, gave him a 5 as well. Just a lot of one-trick ponies, and really only Savali, Genesect, and Mega Garchomp have really any versatility to them, like in terms of move pool and what sets they can run. In 13th place, we have Chabiz. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Why do you have the double Z's? Yeah, Chabiz. For defensive core, I gave him an 8. Overall, this is really strong defensive core, but there's a few hindrances to it, is where there is like no flying resist at all. Yeah, it just isn't a flying resist on this team. And then it's fairly weak to fairy types. Like, yeah, you have the Salazzle and Toxapex. Kartana isn't a resist to anything, but like the Toxapex just shrugs off fairy type moves, but a lot of fairies also get psychic coverage. So pretty much if you face a Gardevoir, it's GG. Also a bit weak to rock, so that might give some issues. But as long as you play well around like the flying and rock types and fairy types, the defensive core is pretty good. For offensive core, I gave him a 7. I should probably mention what the total scores are. So Shaq had 26 out of 50, Stevo 27 out of 50, Fonzo 28 out of 50, and then Chibiz got 33 out of 50. But yes, offensive core. Offensive core score of 7. He has a lot of strong hitters, but most of them are on the physical side. Like, other than looking at it again, I guess not really, because Articuno has 125 special attack. Then you also have Salazzle, Inteleon, and Latios. But like, of the ones that you're going to bring all the time, most of them are physical attackers. And then he has no rock, electric, or ice type. Electric is kind of minor about that, but rock and ice types are stat moves that every draft should have, in my opinion. And then he does have really good speed tiers in general. Just strong variety makes it so no Pokemon can really run Adamant or Modest very easily, which helps with his defensive core. For hazards, I gave him a 7. He has really good hazard setters, but only Defog and Magic Bounce to keep them off. And that's what Defog, and none of his mons want to run Defog. Like, you have Defog Latios, which never wants to run it, Defog Landers, which usually doesn't have room, and then Defog Kartana isn't a thing. So that can be a bit of a hindrance, but since you do have good hazard setters, you can probably try and force your opponent to Defog for you. And then that allows you to take advantage of it with Articuno. And then for synergy, I gave him a 6. He's really good defensive synergy, but the team does lack pivots, with only Inteleon and Lando having U-turn. So it can be tough to get in like that Latios, the Kartana, or the Buzzwole in. And then he doesn't really have anything that abuses screens. Like, you got Dual Dance Landorus, I guess if you want, like Dragon Dance Latios or Calm Mind, Swords Dance Kartana. That's about all he has for setup, and I guess Calm Mind Articuno, but nothing that really screams like I want to abuse screens. So Grimmsnarl's utility on this team isn't the greatest. And then for versatility, I gave him 5. Because other than like Latios and Miltank, everything is a really shallow move pool. Like, Landorus usually runs rock and ground coverage and like knock off your turn. Toxapex runs stab, Grimmsnarl runs stab, Kartana runs stab and fighting, Buzzwole runs stab, Inteleon runs like water, ice, and flying, Salazzle runs stab, Articuno Galar runs stab, and then Mega Sableye only runs like knockoff or Shadow Ball. So not a bunch of coverage options here. And then just because your defensive backbone is fairly strong and you have a few really good breakers, you're probably only going to bring like the same like 6 to 8 mons every single week. So it might become predictable, especially later in the season. In 12th place, we have Robert, if I can find him, with a score of 34. For defensive core, I gave him a 7. His team is also quite weak to ice, especially Freeze Dry, because Slowbro can't switch into that very well. But he does have that really strong regen core in Slowbro and Tangrowth. Um, he does lack good dragon resist though. Like, yeah, Rabambi's an immunity, and then there's Bronzong there, but Bronzong is really easy to chip down, especially since he doesn't have a Wish Passer, and then Rabambi is just super fail. Like, switching on the wrong move once and it's dead. And then like a flamethrower from a Noivern or Garchomp, and yeah, then they can just spam their dragon moves out for free. He also does not have a poison type, so toxic spikes are going to be very scary versus him. That will help. That will really limit his regen core and like the Gudra and Mega Lopunny. For offensive core, I give him an 8. He has really good speed tiers. Just a lot of really fast mods, and they're pretty spread out. Like, biggest gap I can see is like it goes from Rotom Heat at what 87 up to no, because then there's Crocodile. So yeah, it goes from like Crocodile to Lycanroc Dusk in terms of speed tiers, which is not bad at all. That's not enough for like, I don't know. I guess like 108s could probably run like Adamant easily, but that's about it. And there's not a whole lot of mods like that. There's like Terrakion and Burnape and whatnot. So yeah, speed tiers are very good. Really strong physical threats in like Lycanroc Dusk, Crocodile, Mega Lopunny, Swellow, which could also be special. And then like it does have those potential special threats like the Swellow, the Rabambi if it really wants to be like a special breaker with like Specs or Quiver Dance, and then the Gudra. And I guess Rotom Heat can also run Nasty Plot, but those are more situational threats. But he also is a bit lacking in like what stab moves his offensive threat spam. Like both Swellow and Lopunny usually just click their normal type moves, and then with like Boom Burst or Lopunny's Facade or Mega Kick, Rabambi only spams its stab moves. Same with Rotom and Crocodile. So not much, like they're all really strong, but like versus certain threats it will become a very big issue. For hazards I gave him a 5. He has really good hazard setters. With like Lycanroc, Crocodile, Bronzong, Rabambi, and Cofagrigus, but he does lack any good removers. Like Rotom is the best remover, and that's average at best. Like it usually doesn't like running Defog. And then along with that, there, as I mentioned, there's no poison type to absorb the T-Spikes, which will hinder that Slowbro and Tank Growth. And you only have Defoggers, so it kind of hinders your good hazard setters. So you're probably going to spam heavy duty boots every single game. So you can keep your hazards up. For synergy, I gave him a 7. Because that strong defensive synergy, and then Slowbro is just a very good glue mod on this team. Really helps it get in the Mega Lopunny, the Swellow, and the Lycanroc for free with teleport and regen. And then for versatility, I gave him a 7. He has lots of coverage options, but again, the breakers tend to not click the non-stab moves, and then most of the Pokemon are roll locked. Like, you're not going to bring an offensive Slowbro most games. Like, yeah, you could run Nasty Plot, Trick Room, but usually your defensive set's going to be always better, especially with your build. In 11th place, we have Cav. For a defensive core, I gave him a 7. Once again, no freeze-dry switch-ins at all. And just not really good ice resist in general. Like, you have Vaporeon and Fortress, and that's it. So like, if Vaporeon gets toxic, Fortress is easy to ship down, and then an ice type can just go in on this team. And then offensive grass types can also become a pretty big issue if they have a way to break down the Fortress earlier in the game. just because you're giving them boost with your Rillaboom's grassy terrain and you don't have the best grass resist. And then you're also allowing them to run Grassy Glide themselves to maybe catch like the Mega Alakazam and the Neolego. And then the team is also very Ghost Weak. You only have PZ as any type of resist, which kind of really sucks for your Mega Alakazam because you're going to be facing like a Choice Scarf Ghost type every single week and don't deal with it well at all. And then there's just a lot of pressure on Vaporeon in this team. Like, you're using it to get in and then flip turn out into some other threat, so it's going to take a lot of hits and probably die a lot. For offense score, I gave him a 7 because besides Rillaboom, there's no major physical threats. Like, there's also Blaziken, but Blaziken tends to kill itself with Flare Blitz or just missing a KO with close combat and dying. And it's just, Blaziken misses out on so many KOs, it's ridiculous. So the team will struggle a lot against like Assault Vest users. And the team also relies on Hurricane from Tornadus hitting a lot, which is never good. And then just, there's no Ice type and no Dragon type. So I noted the Dragon type just because there are quite a few teams in this draft that are fairly weak to Dragon. And then Ice types are always important in the draft. For hazards, gave him a 7. He has lots of hazard stack, but very limited removal. Like you have Defog Torn and Defog Blaziken and Spin Fortress, but you never run Defog Blaziken. Like, you're wasting your Blaziken if you do that. I guess on his team you can afford to run Defog Torn, but it's still not ideal. And then Fortress usually dies within a few turns of the game after setting hazards. Then for synergy, I gave him an 8. He has really good pivots, or good slow pivots, to get his offensive threats in, like the Flip Turn Vaporeon, Volt Switch Fortress, U-Turn Blaziken and Rillaboom. And then Grassy Trade with the Hippo helps defensively, but it really sucks for Hippo doing any type of damage. Like, you're probably going to have to run like Roar or Whirlwind Hippo every single week just so stuff doesn't set up all over Hippo when Grassy trains up. And in general, I don't think Rillaboom or Tapu Bulu are particularly good if you have a ground type that likes to spam Earthquake. I don't remember if Hippowdon gets high horsepower, but it still really sucks to have to run that over Earthquake. For versatility, I gave him a 6. Every Pokemon on his team is like a one-trick pony besides like Torn and Porygon Z. And other than, yeah, the Torn PZ and like Mega Alakazam, they all have very limited move pools. But the opponents will struggle in prep due to having to prep for like both Scarf and Specs on a lot of his Pokemon, or having to see it predict if the Torn is going to be defensive or offensive. So team will give headaches in prep, which helps with that versatility score. And then at number 10 with 35 points, we have Woof. For defensive score, I gave him a 7. He does not have a good ground switch in. Like, Tornai and Electros are both immune, but like, they just need to predict Tornai with the Stone Edge, and Electros is fairly easy to chip down since it's so slow. And then just electric types are really scary for this team, especially if they have like Ice Punch or Grass Knot to deal with Donphan. Blissey will have to like Wish Teleport pretty much every single week to keep like the Mega Venusaur, the Donphan, and the Azumarill healthy, but like that's not a bad thing because that's literally what Bliss does. And the Blissey Mega Venu Donphan will be very hard to break, because that's just a really strong core. And then besides ground, pretty much he covers all of his all weaknesses pretty well. For an offensive core, I gave him a 6. His speed tiers are pretty bad. And then only Victini and Azu are the really only breakers. And they each only really have one set that's capable of breaking. Like Choice Band Victini can break, and then like Choice Band or Belly Drum Azu. But it's not ideal at all. And like Tornai can like Nasty Pod and then Hurricane, but you have to first Nasty Pod and then Hurricane. And then Greninja can break if it specs, but like it doesn't have that standout high special attack stat. It's like 109 or something. And then he also doesn't have an Ice or Dragon type, which hurts a lot. For hazards, I gave him an 8. He has so many hazard setters, like Stealth Rocks Blissey, the Dual Spikes Gren, Rocks Donphan, Rocks Cobalion, Rocks Regirock. So he's really good on that end, but he does only have 2 removers. But like he has really good removers. Like Tornadus has that Prankster defog, so it can usually always get off a defog, and then Donphan can easily run spin on most things because it's sturdy and it likes running spin. For synergy, I gave him a 7. Blissey is definitely a glue to this team, and like if it goes down in a game, it will be kind of tough to recover from that. But he has so many pivot options with like Teleport Blissey, U-turn Victini, U-turn Gren, U-turn on Torn, Voltage Cobalion, Voltage Electros, so he can get in his few offensive threats really easily and try and break stuff down. For versatility, I gave him a 7, just because good coverage all around, and most Pokemon have multiple sets they can run. Number 9, we have Daddy Dark with a score of 36. For defensive core, I gave him a 7. Like, it's pretty average. Like, if you've been paying attention, like 7 is like average in terms of score wise. It's yeah, his defensive score is that. It's just average. Only like big downside is normal types can just spam their stab moves because you only have one resist in general, which is Aegislash. And like most normal types have the coverage to hit an Aegislash, so that's just something you really have to be careful of. But yeah, other than that, there's like no really standout defensive mon, but like type wise, he covers his resistances and weaknesses pretty well. So yeah, it's not bad. But okay. And then Veil helps a lot with his defensive stuff. Just because he does lack like the high defensive stats. He is a bit weak to Dark Ghost and Rock though. But it's not the biggest issue because like Aegislash with Incineroar and Mega Gardevoir can kind of handle that. And when I was going through this was the first team I got to that had good ice resist. Like he has like what 4 or 5 ice resist and not weak to freeze dry. So good on you, Dark. For an offensive core, I gave him an 8. Just really strong offensive presence. Between like the Aegislash, the Garchomp, and the Mega Gardevoir, like those 3 paired together is super scary offensively. But he does lack a Rock type, and then he does have poor speed tiers. Just like large speed gaps, like it jumps from 80 to 100, and then 102 up to 130. So you're going to be facing a lot of like adamant and modest Pokemon, which is never good when you don't have a standout defensive core. For hazards, I gave him a 6. Only 2 good rockers with Garchomp and Mesprit. And then no spikes, no webs, no T-spikes. But he does have really good removal with like Rapid Spin Blastoise, Defog Rotom, Defog Crobat. So that helps. For Synergy, I gave him a 7. He has really good pivot options to get in Gardevoir, Garchomp, and Aegislash. And then his offensive mons break for each other. And if defensive mons aren't passive, so it can help. They can help like chip down for the endgame sweep of like an SD Scale Shot Garchomp or SD Weakness Policy Aegislash. For her versatility, I gave him an 8. Most Pokemon can be run either offensive or defensive. Really good coverage all around, and then but some Pokemon like Rotom, the Mesprit, and Incineroar will probably be roll locked into like the defensive option, just because that's what's needed on this team. In number 8 slot, we have Kip. For defensive core, I gave him a 7. He is very weak to ghost types, like no normal type. You only really have Galarian Moltres as a resist, but it also lacks recovery, so that hurts a lot. And then, but with that, Galarian Slowking, Milotic, and Gliscor is a disgusting core and will be incredibly hard to break, even for like a ghost type. So that really saved his score there. For an offensive core, I gave him an 8. No ice or rock type. What is up with all you guys not wanting ice types? But he does have good speed tiers. Like his speed tiers are all over the board. It'll be really hard to run like modest or adamant anything. And it's just extremely hard to switch into the combination of Mawile, Zeraora, and Blacephalon. Like they all break for each other really well. Really only have to worry about ground types with those offensive Pokemon, but like that's where your defensive core is for. For hazards, I gave him a 5. Only Selgar really wants to run hazards on his team. Like you also have Gliscor and Mawile for rocks, but neither ever want to run rocks. And then the team only has 2 removers, which is Whimsicott and Gliscor, and neither of those like running Defog either. For Synergy, I gave him a 9. He has extremely strong pivot options, and then really strong type synergy, and then like those offensive and defensive cores just work really well together. For versatility, I gave him a 7. Pretty much the entire team across the board has very shallow move pools, pretty much except for like Mega Mawile and Zeraora. He's going to bring like the defensive core plus Mawile plus Zeraora every single week, and then switch out that 6th Mon. And every single Pokemon only has like one role that they can run. Like your Milotic and Gliscor are always going to be defensive. Your Mawile, Zeraora is always going to be offensive. Like not much variety there. Number 7 slot, we have Capital. For defensive core, I give him a 9. Um, like, nothing on his team wants to switch into an ice type move, really. Like, you got the Frostmoth, and yeah, pretty much just the Frostmoth can switch into special ice type moves, but like, their ice type can just run some type of coverage move for the Frostmoth then, and then kind of out of luck there. Is like Chandelure doesn't have good recovery, and unless you boost, you're also going to be taking hazards, and same goes for Weavile. And then Mega Glade is the only knockoff switching in this team. Like, everything else just hates being knocked off. Like, your Gligar wants to keep its Eviolite, your Chandelure wants to keep its boots or whatnot. Same with Weavile. Celesteela really needs its leftovers to perform well. Primarina's going to want its leftovers or choice item, and then same with Flygon. But he does have a lot of immunities, and because of that, his opponents will pretty much never be able to click a choice move, just because, like, so many ground immunities, so many poison and whatnot. So that really helps. Like, overall, really strong defensive core. Just a few nitpicks with the ice type and knockoff. For offensive core, I give him a 7. Just no rock type again. And then breaking fat fire types like your Arcanines, your Torkoals, Sandescorch and whatnot will probably be very annoying. But along with that, like, Glade and Weavile is a really strong offensive pair. For hazards, I give him a 6. He has spikes, T-spikes, and rocks, but only 2 setters of them. And Gligar really doesn't like running rocks, so you really only have the Roserade to set up spikes and T-spikes. And then only 2 good defoggers, but Flygon will likely not want to run defog on this team. Like, you're going to want probably like Roost U-Turn and Dual Stab or Dragon Dance, or even like Choice Band or Choice Scarf. And then just Frostmoth is a terrible, terrible defogger. So you're pretty much going to run defog Gligar all the time. For synergy, I gave him an 8. Just strong synergy overall. Pretty strong defensive core that can easily whittle down the team for like Glade or Weavile to win late game. For versatility, I gave him an 8. Just a lot of mods that can be either offensive or defensive, like the Primarina, the Flygon, the Slowbro, kinda Roserade, and the Celesteela. And then good coverage overall, like Celesteela has really good coverage, the Raikou has good coverage, Flygon and Slowbro also have amazing coverage, and the Mega Glade. But Primarina, Celesteela, and Slowbro Galar will likely be role locked into a defensive role most weeks, so that could hinder you a little bit, but like, you do have the option to make them offensive, which is still nice and can give headaches in prep. At number 6, we have Willow Rush. For defensive core, I gave him an 8. Once again, his team is very weak to ice and also fairy. Like, he does have a really good fairy resistant Heatran, but that's pretty much it. Nothing else wants to take a fairy type move. And then the same applies with ice types. But top Bulu healing up the Heatran will be very nice, and just Theo defense, Heatran and Bulu is a really strong defensive core and will be incredibly hard to break. For offensive core, I gave him a 7. Most of the offensive threats on his team are physical, besides like the Heatran and Thundurus. So he'll struggle a lot versus Rocky Helmet because everyone runs Rocky Helmet versus the Urshifu. But he does have really strong setup options with like the Naspot Thunderous, the SD or Dragon Dance Haxorus, Belly Drum Slurpuff, Sword Sense Mega Absol. So that helps a lot. For hazards, I give him a 9. He has really good hazard setters with like Heatran, DOD, Slurpuff, and Rune. But not the best removal. Like you got the Prankster Thunderous and the Skunk Tank. But Magic Balance really helps with that. And with your large amount of hazards, you're probably going to force your opponent to defog anyways. For Synergy, I gave him a 9. This is like the only blue team I've ever seen that isn't hurting itself with Grassy Terrain. Like your Runerigus can't really click Earthquake that well, but like you're probably never bringing Runerigus anyways, let's be honest. So terrain in general just helps your team a lot and doesn't really hinder it. And then just DOD is amazing with this team. Like it helps supports all your mons so much with like just teleport and recover. For versatility, I gave him a 7. About half the mons have good coverage options and the other half don't, but that's not necessarily bad. But you will likely bring about the same 6 to 8 mons every single week and pretty much have the exact same game plan every single week, which is set up hazards, teleport out with Dio, go into like Urshifu or Mega Absol, click some buttons, switch out back into Dio or Bulu, and rinse and repeat. At number 5, we have Andrew. For defensive core, I gave him an 8. He doesn't switch into fire ice types very well, but he can help keep stuff healthy with Leech Seed spam, with like the Comfy and Shaman. So that just in general makes this team a lot bulkier. It really helps out with the Swampert, the Latias, and the Scizor. Offensive core, I also gave him an 8. He may struggle a bit with versus like bulky dark types, but those are pretty far and few between. Like there's Mandibuzz and like Mega Sableye. And then he doesn't have an ice or a rock type, so that hurts a little bit. But I mean, other than that, like Cinderace hits really hard. The Darkrai is crazy, especially with this team. For how much complaining people were doing at the beginning of the draft, I'm surprised you got Darkrai with this team. And then for hazards, I gave him a 7. He has lots of removal, but is only defog. And then only 2 hazard setters with the Skarmory and Swampert, but like both of those are really good hazard setters. But he does lack a poison type to absorb T-Spikes, so that really hurts the Swampert, the Darkrai, Cinderace, Shaman, and Keldeo. For synergy, I gave him a 9. Just really good synergy all around. Lots of pivots to help get Darkrai and Cinderace in, and lots of type immunities. With like 3 ground immunities, psychic immunity, electric immunities. Just overall really good synergy. And then for versatility, I gave him a 7. It may be a bit difficult to get creative with building, as most of his Pokemon are one-trick ponies. But he does have decent coverage options. Like Darkrai gets like Ice Beam and Sludge Bomb. Latias has really good coverage right now. And Cinderace has pretty good coverage. But since like your early picks were so strong, you're probably never bringing Electivire and Braviary. Like, if I was playing this team, I wouldn't even prep for those 2. At number 4, we have Nickinator. Well, no, isn't your name Drew or something? Andrew? I don't remember. It's not Nick. But Dominic, yes. So at number 4 we have Dominic with 42 points. For defensive core I gave you a 10. Like, this is the best defensive core in the draft. Or in the league. Just so strong. And will be incredibly hard to break without without a type of setup. Like Mega Aggron Togekiss Como is just disgusting, and then you slapped on Arcanine, Araquanid, and Manabuzz on top of that. Like, no, your team's never dying. For an offensive core, I give him a 7. He does have pretty bad speed tiers. Like large gaps. Your fastest mod is Heliolisk at 109. And then there's no rock type, but you do have strong setup options like the Nasty Plot Togekiss, all the forms of setup Como has. Earlier today you brought Flame Charge Arcanine. And then you also have webs to help with those poor speed tiers. For hazards, I gave you a 9 because you do have a lot of hazard setters like the Como, Araquanid, Nidoqueen, and Mega Aggron. But the team would appreciate spikes just because it is so defensive and you're going to be pivoting around a lot. You're forcing your opponent to pivot, so spikes help a lot with that. But fortunately, you do not have those spikes. And you do have good removal options though, with like Togekiss, and Mr. Mime, and the Manabuzz. So, good options there. For Synergy, I gave him an 8. The Togekiss and Togedemaru wish passing into like Mega Aggron combo helps a lot, though the team would appreciate a better wish passer because neither one of those is a particularly good wish passer, but they still get the job done. And then just really strong pivots with like Teleport Arcanine, all your Volt turn options. But the team may struggle a bit in like drawn out defensive games. Like if the opponent has a really strong defensive core, you will probably have some issues. For versatility, I have an 8. Just across the board, lots of coverage options. And Como is like versatile dot Pokemon. It has so many sets it can run in such a wide move pool. And then pretty much every Pokemon have multiple potential sets they can run, like your offensive Arcanine, or it can be defensive. Same with Araquanid, same with Nidoqueen. Manabuzz can run Nasty Plot if you really wanted. So yeah, so many options with this team. At number 3, we have Ace with 43 points. For defensive core, I give him an 8. Ghost types are a bit spooky, haha. If Porygon 2 gets a bit low, because you don't have any type of resist or immunity outside of that. But it is really hard to chip down a P2. Just expect it to get toxic every single game. But I mean, you do have Geller Weezing and Starmie to come in on those toxics and just kind of shrug them off. But other than like those ghost types, just very strong defensive core that complements Kieran Black really well. Like Mega Scizor, Weezing Galar, Kieran Black is really strong defensively. Slapping on P2 and a Rhyperior with that, and a Mantine, like they all have really good, or you have lots of immunities that just cover for each other. One thing to note is with the lack of Dark type, like if you're facing a Reuniclus with Iron Defense Calm Mind, that could be very scary. Or just pretty much anything with stored power can get a bit out of hand if you let it. For an offensive core, I give him a 9. Just offensive threats left and right. Like, you got the Kieran Black there, you have the Entei with Sacred Fire, you got Mimikyu to deter setup. Breloom with its stupid strong priority options. Rapirior just hits really hard. Starmie, with if you give it the analytic boost, hits really hard, and then Mega Scissor and Lycanroc just more priority options. But with that, there is a lack of good Choice Scarf Pokemon, but that's not the biggest reveal. It's just because you do have so much priority on your team. And just lots of setup and strong hitters in general. For hazards, I gave him an 8. This team is another one that would really appreciate a spike setter, just kind of for the opposite of what Nick and Nader's team is. Whereas he wants it for defensive reasons, you really want it for offensive reasons, just to help chip down stuff for the Kieran Black and Breloom. So then, for hazards, I gave him an 8. Or, wait, that's what I just said. Sorry. Yeah, so other than spike setters, he has a few good rock setters like the Rapirior and the Lycanroc. And then lots of removal options as well. For synergy, I gave him a 9. Just really strong defensive and offensive cores that complement each other nicely. But he does only have 2 pivot options, which is like Flip Turn Starmie and U-Turn Mega Scissor. So it could be, and Teleport P2. So it may be a bit difficult to get in like the Kieran Black or the Entei, but it won't be. It shouldn't have too many issues with that. Just something to watch out for. And then for versatility, I also gave him a 9 here. Pretty much every single Pokemon has really good coverage options and has multiple sets it can run. At number 2 slot, have Jamal with 43 points as well. Defensive core, I gave him a 10. This is pretty much the only team that did not have any glaring weaknesses. Like, not weak to ice, not really weak to psychic or dark or anything. That Dragon Fairy Steel core is just stupid. Like, that is pretty much the best Fairy Dragon Steel core you can get in the game. And then also just 2 really good Wish Passers, which makes that core even harder to break. The only thing is that other fire types might become a bit of an issue just because you're boosting them with your Zard Y, but like that's only if like the Zygarde gets low. So it's not that big of a worry. For offensive core, I gave him a 9. It's like one of 2 teams that covered every single type in the draft, so it has stab for every single type. But the speed tiers could be better, as there's nothing really, there's nothing above base 110. So like if you're facing a Scarf like Latios or a Torrentee or some other like just fast Pokemon, you're probably going to struggle quite a bit against those if they have the coverage for your defensive core. So along with that, the team is just a bit reliant on the webs from Vikavolt. For hazards, I gave him a 7. Lots of good hazard setters, like the Vikavolt, the Frostlass, Terrakion, and Jirachi. But he doesn't have the best removal options. Like there's Rapid Spin Serena, Defog Zard Y, and Defog Tapu Fini, which is a bit of a hindrance at Mega Zard Y. Usually you like to see 4 to 5 hazard removers other than Zard on a Charizard team. For synergy, I gave him a 9. He has really good pivot options with like U-turn Jirachi, U-turn Uxie, and Serena, and like full stretch Vikavolt. And then like there's pretty much no one mon that can break his defensive backbone. It'll take a lot of just slow chipping away. Will probably be long games every single week if your opponent plays smart. For versatility, gave him an 8. Mostly because you're going to bring the same 5 mons every single week and then just kind of rotate out that last one. But most of his Pokemon can run multiple sets. Like, Tapu Fini can be, I don't know, your standard OU set, or it can be like Iron Defense, Calm Mind, Drain Kiss. Zygarde can be offensive or defensive, same with Jirachi. So, quite a few Pokemon can run multiple sets, but the team in general doesn't have the best coverage options. But like this team doesn't need it because it covers everything with its stab in general. And then for the number 1 slot, we have Segai. For a defensive core, I gave him a 9. Just lots of immunities in general, and just strong defensive backbones with like the Slowking, Escavalier, and Ron Frost and Kamala, and even Salamence will probably be run defensive more often than you'd think with like heavy U-Boots, Intimidate, and Roost now. But there is a lot of pressure on the Slowking. But he does have the failsafe against setup with the Alakazam, like with Magic Guard Focus Sash. For offensive core, I gave him a 9. Sega has the other team that has stab for every single type. And just lots of both physical and special breakers. Like, and a lot of those can be either physical or special, like the Infernape or the Mega Diancie, or even Salamence actually. Really good speed tiers. He doesn't have any glaring speed tier gaps. And like, yeah, Alakazam is his fastest at 120, but it's not a big worry because he has some good choice scarf options as well, and like Infernape and Gengar. Also has lots of setup options like Dragon Dance Salamence, SD Infernape, or Nascaplat Gengar, Bulk Up Zarude, and Calm My Mega Diancie, and Nascaplat Alakazam. He does lack priority though, like there's just Mach Punch and Infernape really, so that may become an issue. For hazards, I gave him an 8. Another team that doesn't have hazards but would really appreciate it. But he has 3 amazing rockers in like Infernape, Sandslash, and Mega Diancie. And then just lots of ways to get rid of hazards, like between the Defog Salamence, Rotom, and Rapid Spin Kamala, and Sandslash, along with the Magic Bounce Mega Diancie. For synergy, I gave him a 10. Just lots of slow pivots to get in the frail breakers in for free. And his defensive core just really supports his offensive core and in the ability to get stuff in. So he won't have to click predict often. Like he just clicks a safe U-turn or teleport, gets in his offense mod, clicks attacks what's in front of him, and then switch out back into those pivots and rinse and repeat. For versatility, I gave him a 9. His game plan will pretty much be the exact same every single week, so it may become a bit predictable. But wide move pools across the board, and every Pokemon has potential has multiple potential sets. So, yeah. Believe that is everyone. So, thanks you guys for watching. And again, please complain to Shaq and not me.